Chapter 13. The Painting. Hanyu's POV. After a few hours spent posing, Hanyu was starting to wonder whether being lovely was such an advantage after all. Lord Antony had chosen a pale blue robe with gold embroidery and produced some gold jewelry and a little box of makeup. He'd shoved the whole bundle into Hanyu's arms. "I assume you know what to do with all this?" And gone to his bedchamber to gather his paints and canvases. When he returned and found Hanyu dressed as he'd ordered, the god became a whirlwind of activity. He'd arranged blankets on the sofa, added more oil to the torches, and then cursed himself when they burned brighter than he wanted, and finally posed Hanyu himself. That had been thrilling. He'd told Hanyu to lie on the sofa and prop himself up on one elbow. Hanyu had obeyed, but then Lord Antony had been right there. He'd arranged Hanyu's long yellow braid several different ways, then pulled it loose. Hanyu had shivered at the feeling of his god's fingers combing through his hair, coaxing it to drape over his shoulders. Then Lord Antony had put his hands on Hanyu's legs. Hanyu had had to close his eyes and think about the high priest's pinched face as his master pushed his robe up over one of his thighs. Finally, Lord Antony took his face between careful hands, turning it slightly to test the different ways the light could fall on his features. Hanyu had stared spellbound up into the god's face, which was remote with concentration, but so tantalizingly close in proximity. Lord Antony's lips were right there, right there. All it would take would be the slightest forward motion, just the tiniest twitch of his neck. Hanyu was fighting down an erection by the time Lord Antony pulled back. "Now hold still," and removed the temptation. Luckily, he'd softened enough to escape notice by the time the god was finished arranging his canvas and paints. Unluckily, that was the last exciting thing that had happened. Now his elbow was tired, and his hand was asleep, his eyelids were growing heavy, his bladder was tight and insistent, and he was excruciatingly bored. Lord Antony hadn't said a word since he sat down and began work, except to occasionally snap out a "Hold still!" He looked up at Hanyu every few moments, but his brow was furrowed in concentration, and there was no hint of that dizzying little smile anywhere on his face. He showed no indication of even being aware of the passage of time. Hanyu hated to disappoint his god, but it would hardly be the first time today. Anyhow, it would probably disappoint him even more if his offering pissed on his sofa. "My lord?" Hanyu's voice came out in a small, creaky squeak. He cleared his throat, then swallowed hard when the god's eyes bounced up to meet his, clearly startled and irritated. "Please forgive me, my lord, but I have to—" He trailed off delicately, but Lord Antony only went on staring at him in annoyance. "Piss," he finished at last. "I have to take a piss." "Oh," his master blinked. "Of course, go ahead." As Hanyu scrambled to his feet, sighing softly at the pleasure of moving his limbs after so much stillness, Lord Antony got up as well, muttering, "How long have we been sitting here?" By the time Hanyu returned to the sitting room, the god was glaring at him. What had he done wrong now? Hanyu wasn't sure, but he dropped to his knees and prostrated himself anyway. "Why didn't you say something?" Lord Antony demanded. "It's going to be morning soon, and you just had several full hours of exercise after a sleepless night sitting up with me. You need to sleep at some point." "Forgive me, my lord, please," Hanyu begged. It had been such a long, strange several days, and he couldn't bear to have his master angry with him any more. "I didn't want to disobey. You told me to be still." The god sighed wearily, and Hanyu forced himself to stay down instead of peeking up to gauge his expression. "Hanyu, I want you to listen to me. I do not need to sleep, at least not more than a few hours now and then. I do not need to relieve myself. I do not need water or food. I know that you need those things, and I do my best to remember in the moment, but it is very easy for me to lose track of time. I am extremely old, and a day moves very quickly for me. I will never keep you from those things on purpose, not even for a punishment, no matter how angry I am. If you aren't able to access them because of something I'm doing or for any other reason, you have to tell me, because these are not things that I ever want to deprive you of. Do you understand?" "Yes, my lord," Hanyu replied meekly. It was intimidating to think of interrupting the god's painting or any other activities he might want to engage in with Hanyu, but Lord Antony made sense. It wasn't his job to continuously monitor Hanyu for signs of weariness or demand to know whether he was hungry. Hanyu wasn't used to making demands or even requests. In the temple, every need was seen to on a rigid schedule. But he had his orders, and he'd simply have to do his best to obey. Good. Now get up, boy. Help me move the easel and then go to bed. If you don't wake when they come to the door to bring you above deck, I'll tell them to go without you. Antony's POV. The snores started almost as soon as Antony doused the torches. What he wouldn't give to sleep so easily. To his horror, he found himself smiling and rolling his eyes with a feeling approaching fondness as the racket set in. Well, there was no time to worry about his responses to the pesky boy. Antony had enchanted papers to check. Titus hadn't written back, of fucking course, but Claudia had. Her sheet was covered in her small, precise script. My dearest Antony, I too have not heard from our brother in 2 weeks. I am sending you the last coordinates he shared with me. It's not far from your current location, so perhaps you could search for him? I'm sorry to trouble you, but I'm worried about him too. How did things go with Marcus's gift? Did it cause much grumbling? Was lovely Theodora pleased at least? I'm going to steal her away from you eventually, brother mine, mark my words. No, I haven't noticed any dip in the quality of offerings. As you say, serves you right for choosing from the back row. I claimed the temple's choice as usual, and he's perfect, as always. I'm glad your offering is at least entertaining. Is he finally going to break you of this prudish streak you have going on? It's coming up on 700 years since the last time you took a human to your bed, isn't it? That's far too long when they're so well trained. Things are going well here. The King of Alrest sent a ship out to fight me, so that was a lovely scuffle and a wonderful meal for everyone, and we captured 2 elves, which brings my count up to 7. Despite all the good it brought, everyone has been a bit low since the attack, and I think I understand why. Even after all these centuries, there's a part of you that sees those flags and thinks home, and it's jarring to be reminded that they're here to kill you, don't you find? In particular, I wonder about the king. How many generations do you suppose separate us from our royal cousin now? Does he even know it's his own blood commanding the ships he's hunting? It's so strange to think that there's no one left alive on that continent who remembers us, so who knows what they all believe by now? I'm sorry to burden you with my melancholy thoughts, Antony. I've been feeling odd since I realized that our 1000th year of exile has passed at some point in the last few decades, and we didn't even notice. I don't suppose you've had any signs of aging yet? Sometimes I convince myself I found a wrinkle or gray hair, but it always turns out to be a trick of the light. Be well, brother. Titus is scaring me, and I must admit that without your letters I would feel quite alone. I promise to be more agreeable in my next message. Your loving sister, Claudia. Antony noted down the coordinates his sister had sent him on a piece of scratched paper, then he set the vellum back in its box, feeling disquieted. He'd forgotten to look for signs of age. Shit, it had been years since he thought to check. Feeling a dizzy hope stir his insides, Antony stepped over the sprawled, snoring boy to get to his washroom and look into his mirror. He peered at himself in the glass. Gray hairs would be no indicator for him, but he could at least check for wrinkles. He turned his head this way and that, but no new lines showed. He lifted his chin, but the skin beneath showed no sign of slackening. The skin under his eyes were no baggier than normal. His fingers, too, looked the same as always. Finally, Antony sagged against the wall in defeat. Nothing. There was nothing. 1,000 years had flowed over him like a faint breeze, leaving not the slightest trace in their passing. He pushed shaking hands through his unthinned hair. He remembered, all at once, his mother chiding him gently for saying forever. There's no such thing, sweet boy, she had said, smiling down, the sunlight playing off the jewels in her ears. Sooner or later, everything dies and goes back to the earth. Are you so sure of that, mother? He whispered now into his shaking fingers. A particularly deep snore shook him from his despairing thoughts, and he leaned back and sighed. The trick was to have tasks. They'd all learned that literal ages ago. Right now, painting that damn boy was proving to be task enough for him. Hanyu was incapable of holding still. He made a fine image, reclining on the sofa with his silks falling around him, as long as you didn't see his fingers rubbing at one another, or his tongue poking around in his mouth, or his toes twitching in time to some inaudible music. Or in time to something, anyhow, since the boy didn't appear to have a musical bone in all that great length of a body. That was the trick. Focus on the moment, focus on a project, focus on the boy if it would help. That was how you handled forever.